Welcome to Kodsnack, Jack.
Thanks. It's great to be here, Frederick.
Yeah, this is going to be really fun. I would guess that most of the listeners to this podcast don't know who you are. So would you like to give a short introduction?
Yes. So my name is Jack Cheng. I'm based here in Detroit, Michigan. And what I do for a living is I'm a children's author. I've written a few novels, one of them that your listeners might even have heard of because it was published in a bunch of different countries, including in Swedish.
Oh, cool.
It's called See You in the Cosmos is the English title. And then I had another book that came out last year that was called The Many Masks of Andy Joe. That was more just based on my own experiences growing up as a Chinese American kid here in Metro Detroit. So I've been really interested in technology ever since, being a kid. And actually, when I graduated from college, from undergraduate university, I moved to New York, and I was first working in advertising for a while, and then working in tech for a while. And so I was mainly kind of I want to say like user experience designer, but we were such a small company that, that included front end design, graphic design, a little bit of copywriting, you know.
You get to cover the whole.
Yeah. So I've stayed kind of connected to tech. Around that time, I also had I was writing a lot in like blog posts and essays in tech. And there's this one essay of mine that got a lot of traction that was called the slow web movement. It was sort of trying to pull apart or distill some principles for user interface design that were more kind of like calmer and sane and less trying to get you to be addicted to the slot machine of social media or whatever. So I've always like coded my own websites, and I redesign my website news and newsletter every couple of years.
Yep.
More recently, this year, I started experimenting with some of the AI Copilot coding tools. And there's this idea that I'd had for a while that I wanted. So the story behind it is that I used to use this app on the iPhone called Captio, which let you email a note to yourself. Oh, yeah. And it was like really, really simple. And the way I manage my notes, everything lives as text files. And sometimes I use Obsidian, but other times I use like NVAlt on the Mac, or there's another app I like called FS Notes that basically, they work the same way. They let you really quickly search through an archive of text files. Yep. But basically I had it set up so that Captio would let me send an email to an email address that was connected to my Zapier account. And then Zapier would convert it into a text file that put it in my Dropbox that then synced to my archive. But what happened was I got a new iPhone, and Captio was no longer being developed and didn't even work with the version of iOS that I had now, or the phone that I had. And then, I was aware of all GitHub Copilot and, of course, ChatGPT. Yeah. And one day I was like, I wonder how hard it would be to actually just spin up an iPhone app to actually just do this and completely even, skip the whole email step. I would just drop it into a iCloud folder. And I got like a rough prototype of it working in like a couple hours. And I was like, oh,
there's something here.
Yes, something there. And then I think then there's sort of the much longer process of months of actually making it so that other people can use it too.
Yeah, that's the last 10% taking 90% of the time.
Yeah, and the app is called Bebop.
Yeah,
Bebop Quick Notes is the full title in the App Store.
Yeah, and I really, really like the app. We'll get to that. but okay. So at that point, you coded websites and stuff. Did you? But you hadn't done any app development before. Had you done other development?
So back when I was working in tech, we were mostly working with in Ruby on Rails. So I, and I was doing all the front end code. So like what usually happens is if I have a existing code base in front of me, I can figure out how it works and, and how to get it to do what I want. I mean, I think that's a remnant of just, from the early days of like working with WordPress and TypePad templates. It's like when I'm in there, I'm like, okay, I can see how everything's arranged. And so that was kind of the extent of my like back end coding. And I actually did try learning Swift UI. I think it was like the second year that Swift UI was out.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I was started doing a couple of tutorials, and one, it's like I quickly realized that like, you know, a lot of things were not fully there yet with Swift UI. That it was very much, there wasn't enough documentation. There were things that you still had to do in Objective-C and Swift. So I kind of just like put it on hold. And I think the other thing is like, I didn't have an actual project to work on. I was just kind of like goofing around, and I didn't really have a project in mind. And so I always tend to learn better when there's a specific thing I want to build.
Yeah, me too. Very much so. But yeah, I feel like that broad UX and user interface experience, that's really important for getting good results on iOS as well.
Yeah, I think so. I just, from, you know, the perspective of someone who is like new to it, so much of it was just learning the conventions in iOS, you know. I imagine like some of your listeners might, you know, not be like app developers, but there's so many like aspects of different interactions that like you don't really fully understand or even realize are there, because they happen so quick until you're actually like building it. And I think it's actually very similar to like writing in that way. I think like once you start writing fiction, you know, you or nonfiction or whatever, you end up like reading differently, because you're looking for like, you're noticing specific things that you've encountered too. So
there's so much interesting stuff like that around it. So yeah, I'm really interested in the ChatGPT and Copilot side of it as well, because I feel like I realized talking to other people that I think I'm kind of very much in my own bubble of like opinions and thoughts about the whole AI Copilot helper things. So what were sort of your impressions of them when you started using them, or how did you think about them? What did you expect beforehand? Stuff like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was, so for ChatGPT, my main use for that was, I was like, you know, I don't know what the conventions are for how to like architect this app in Swift UI. And so I was asking questions. It's like, how do I set up, you know, that's like, what kind of architecture is best, or like, what kind of architecture does Apple recommend? Cause like back when I was working, with Rails, everything was like, you know, MVC, model view controller.
Oh yeah.
And then now it's like, I'm like view models and app intents, you know, and intent models and all that. So I think like I was just like using it as, yes, just someone or something to ask about when I had like sort of more abstract questions.
Yeah.
And then what I found with using GitHub Copilot was that, you know, it sort of, it is kind of this like more advanced autocomplete in a way, but also it, because I'm working in Swift UI, like everything's getting updated so fast that a lot of the training data, was outdated. So, you know,
of course.
Yeah. So I would like do something, you know, I was using like Visual Studio Code, and I would do something and then like bring it into to build it in Xcode. And then there would be a lot of like deprecations and things. And so that, I think that's something that I kind of like learned where, it really, it actually like it, one thing that I think it really helped me, like just the presence of the AI coding tools, it forces you to like think through the interactions and think through what you want the code to do in order to be able to explain it to Copilot or to GPT, right? Like, and I think like that's really, really helpful because I'm like normally a pretty messy like programmer.
Yeah, who isn't?
That I just like, I get sucked in and I'm like chasing all these like kind of like little gold coins along the way without like being able to step back and refactor, reorganize. So I think it's actually helped me like step back and think more like broadly about like what am I actually trying to accomplish?
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty interesting. I've been thinking about it from a different direction when I've noticed. I've been thinking sometimes that, people who think AI copilots and stuff are so great. What if you put that much care into asking questions of people as well? Because we don't do that. Right. We're so messy.
Yeah.
And I guess that could actually be a great benefit in the long run as well. Like making more people think more about how they ask questions to get better results.
Yeah. And I think that there is a kind of like needing to be able to, or like, it's like you have to be able to like leap outside of that domain and cross apply it to a different domain, like, interacting with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think another thing I noticed was just how I definitely felt like, oh yeah, this is like, if I was a more experienced coder, this would, like for right now, it ends up taking me as much time as if I were to like learn how to code it from scratch because things are wrong, and then I have to go look them up, and in the process of looking them up, I like understand them. But it definitely is like it smooths that process for me, definitely. But I could also see, I'm like, oh yeah, if you are an experienced coder and you know what you're looking for and how to verify it, then this exponentially increases how quickly you can like spin out new features. And that to me, there's also this realization of like, like the big companies that are rolling out updates every 2 weeks, right? It's like everyone in those companies is using those coding tools. And so if everyone can build everything faster, then the products are going to end up becoming like more quickly bloated with features.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so it's just gonna, like, I find this with, I use Figma for, a lot of designs, but I typically, like when I'm like working on this app, I do everything just in code, and Figma is more for kind of like the icons and figuring out those kinds of things. But like, I feel like I end up like engaging with that app every few months for like, a couple of days. But like every time I'm there, there's like all these new features that I'm overwhelmed by, and I don't like, it's like, it's harder. Yeah. I'm like, I'm just like, stop it. It's like, I wish every app had like a switch that you could just say like freeze all these features, freeze them in Carbonite and like lock this version. Don't give me anything else.
Yeah, exactly. I might even want to freeze some of the bugs because I know how to work with them.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yes. So you had sort of a back and forth workflow between VS Code and Xcode then, sort of.
Yeah, definitely. Unless I guess like I wasn't aware of any other ways to do it, and because I was like, I would pop it onto my phone for testing, and I think my Mac Mini and my MacBook are like they're just like kind of the entry level models, so they're not super quick at generating like the previews in Xcode. So I find it just like it's easier just to like build it for my phone and just like test it on device. Yeah,
I'm sort of in that workflow as well most of the time. Like, there are previews and stuff, but I want to see it running.
Yeah,
feels better. So they were really helpful, like finding out the right ways to like architecting the code and things like that. Were there things where it was less helpful, or where you used it less as well? I
think where it's less helpful is when I'm trying to do an interaction that's like not a standard interaction. I think it's sort of, it'll think I mean something that already exists, right? Because that's the nature of the training data.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think also because of the way that there are kind of like limitations to how much of the code GPT can hold in memory at once, there's, if I'm asking a question or asking it something that like spans across too much of my code base, then it's not helpful. Then it's like you should try this, but then it's not aware of what my other other files are doing. I am using I forget the name of it, but there's a like a code editor that has AI more integrated into it that it basically like it works exactly like VS Code, but I forget the name of it. But it has like
We'll find it and put it in the show notes.
yeah. I'll find it. But it's more now. It like has everything baked in, and that is able to like go across my entire code base and
cool.
Help me like better help me like refactor things.
Yeah.
So that's useful. But it all still runs on like semi stale training data. So that's a constant like. Even when I tell it, I'm like, no, I want like iOS 17 at least, Xcode 15. It's still like
this is what we have for you. but still, then you have something to build on when, like you said, figuring out if there's a newer way to do it or fixing the warnings or what have you. It's still a great starting point.
Yeah, I think also the other thing I was learning, not specific to to AI, but I think just because it's been a while since I've like worked on a production level app, and that other people used or are using, it's that I'm realizing, especially interacting with like folks who have given feedback on Bebop and made like feature requests and things like that, just like the maintenance costs of every decision that I make in the app.
Yeah.
And even with like I'm like, oh yeah, I'll have to like at some point set up like migrations, because if I want to change things and change the way like I handle some of the variables, and that's like a whole other layer of stuff that I have to like deal with. And so that's very much on my mind. It's like, as I'm working on a feature, I'm like, okay, what's going to be the cost of maintaining it, and can I do this in a way that sort of still enables me to be like flexible and nimble in the future?
Yeah, doing as little as possible. I mean, I feel like you really managed to keep the scope impressively small. I always love that. It feels like that's where the great iOS apps especially started. Like everything was much more scaled back than you would expect, and it worked really well for what it did and nothing else.
Yeah, and it's kind of this like, it's this perennial challenge where it's like as people start using it and you're trying to get it to fit everyone's use cases, you end up having to like add things, right? And so I think there's a part of me that was like, oh yeah, I understand why these other note apps are the way that they are, because they're trying to solve for the same problems I am. And I think at some point I feel like there's a point where I haven't had to do it yet, because I feel like the feature requests I've gotten so far are like still very much in line with what I already had planned for like for some of the updates. But there will be a point where I'm like, I will not be able to support this.
Yeah.
If you need something like this, it's better to use like this other app.
Yeah. I mean, if you start wanting, there are so many apps out there. So if you want something with many more features, it's probably out there somewhere.
Right. Exactly.
And I love how clean and pared down it is right now. So I mean, basically, what you can do, really briefly, you can enter text, you can hit save, and it gets saved to iCloud.
Right. Yeah, to a folder of your choice. And then the probably like one, I would say, like significant feature that I added that was like maybe a little different than other note apps is there's a button in the top right corner that I call flashback, that basically it will cycle you there's only one button. I know some notes apps have like a back and forward, like up and down, that let you like kind of like similar to I think like the Apple's Mail app has something similar.
Move through,
cycle back and forth. But to me, even having to choose like, do I want to go backwards or forwards? That is like an extra decision versus just choosing, I want to flashback and I would keep going. So what you do is there's a set number. By default, it's 3, but you can change that number. is you tap the button, it shows you your most recent note. You tap it again, it shows you your second most recent note. And then once it gets to the third one, the next one brings up a blank note again. And so I think like part of where this comes from is I have ADHD, and so I easily get overwhelmed when I have too many choices to make. And I think there are so many some of the other apps, they sort of make you make these like multiple choice decisions of like, do I want A, B, or C? Whereas like I want to just turn that into a binary. I want this or I don't want this. And so I think like I because of how my own brain works, you know, I'm thinking a lot about like, how much like cognitive load is this decision, is each button and each decision putting on the user.
I think it's a really great way of thinking. And you wrote a really good blog post about some of this thinking as well, which I'll of course also link to. I recommend everyone reading it. And I think is it the largest feature you added when you added the option of appending to a file?
Oh yeah, so that was something that I added in like a more recent update. So at launch, all it basically let you do was you chose the directory you wanted to save the file in. You could save the file and then flash them back and like update the flashback notes. And then something that I discovered after the initial version launched is that so many people who liked it and were using it were also using Obsidian.
Hello.
And so there were a lot of Obsidian related feature requests. One was, initially I only had one file name format of it takes the first line of your note and uses that as the title of the file. And so folks were saying that they would love to, have it like work with their daily notes. So on one level, I added the other thing you could do in the initial launch version was that you could append like a footer to your note with text or a date. So like I added a date option that was like an internally linked date so that it would show up in your links for your daily note. But then some folks also wanted to like append it to the daily note. So I was like trying to figure out how to do that. And while I was working on the file naming, I realized that, if the file name structure is just whatever, if it's just named after today's day, then I could just offer the option to, instead of creating a new file and renaming if it's an existing file, it would like on iOS or macOS, it adds kind of a number after it. Instead of doing that, I could just give the option to append to the file if the file already exists. And so then like now what I'm currently working on and getting kind of ready to roll out in the next update is just more custom kind of like header and templating options. Because if you think about, it's like if you're appending to your daily note, you might want like a horizontal rule. You might not want a footer. You might want even like, you might want the title of the note to be excluded from the body of the note.
Yeah, of course. Now that you say it.
So those are also a lot of like kind of the feature requests that I was getting. And so I was like trying to figure out a elegant way of handling that as well. So in the new update, you'll just be able to like customize the header, and then also there is an option for to do like a entirely custom template using, it's sort of like tokenized so that you could put in, put everything the way you want it. The other thing that was in the launch version is I did offer like a pro upgrade, quote unquote pro, I'm doing air quotes. That was basically, more or less just like kind of a tip for me as a way of saying thanks. Like from the beginning, I was like, aside from the development time, right? It's like I have no hosting costs. Everything works off of iCloud. I'm not paying any monthly fees aside, from my App Store developer account. So I wanted to like offer as much as I could, just like free, unlimited. And so I had like a, in the US, it's like a $5, upgrade. It might be like €5 over there. $4.99. That was effectively like a way of saying like thank you, and giving me a tip for thanks. And then also I did end up adding some like small features to that, like there's like you can set a color theme.
Yep.
And there are other kind of like very like fiddly features that I would describe as like something that I do is whenever I share a link or something to my Notes app, in this case, to Bebop using the share extension, what I typically do is instead of typing additional things after the note, I put it before the link or title of the document. And so there's like a setting to like just like place the cursor instead of at the end, at the very beginning. They're like, there are these like little things that don't, they're like minor improvements to like, speed up speed up capture, but they're not that important. So I kind of like threw some of those behind the Pro upgrade.
Yeah, it's a nice trade-off. We interrupt this broadcast with a quick thank you to all our sponsors on Ko-fi. You too can become one by visiting ko-fi.com/kodsnack, KODSNACK, and making a one-time or monthly donation. If you support us with €5 or more per month, you get some very, very nice stickers in the mail. And if you support us on the barista level for €10 or more per month, you also get a huge thank you right here. Thank you, Andreas Legell, Brother Ingo, and Tobbe Lundberg. And remember, you're a fantastic person whether you support us with money or not. And I don't know if you said it before, but when you save, the text disappears. And I think for people who haven't tried something like that, it's such a fantastic way of sort of offloading. Like you said, cognitive load. It feels so much better to just go in, for me at least, go in, write something down, hit save, and it's gone. It's taken care of. I don't need to think of where to put it or get caught up in what I wrote before, because I probably made another note 2 minutes earlier about something else. Yeah.
Like a big part of the ethos of the app is that like that big screens are not the same as small screens. That when you're on the phone, the prime use case is like capture, and that like organization, review, revision, those are better done when you're back at your like desktop. At least that's the way I use it, and that's the way I imagine like a lot of folks who use Obsidian use it. And so I wanted to just make it, I think in my blog post I called it like capture first.
Yeah.
In that like everything is obsessively focused on how do I make it so that you're able to get down that fleeting idea as like quickly as possible. And then, you can worry about what that is later, but then like have it be ready for your next idea.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great.
and there's also, there's like a satisfaction to being like to hitting that button.
Yes.
And it gives you a little haptic feedback of like, it's saved and it's like done, it's like, and that's like, I think that's another thing that like, I think my own like ADHD brain is like, I'm looking for that like little tiny dopamine hit of like, feeling like I've accomplished something. And so that's partly responsible for that design choice as well.
It works really, really well. Really like it. And so clean. So people go and try it. You might like it as well. So what do you use for your notes on the big screen side?
Yeah, I end up using so many different apps. I think for me, part of it is that like for different kinds of writing, I use different apps because something about the context of that specific app, it sort of sets me in the mood of writing that kind of thing. So like right now, what I'm doing is basically like Obsidian is my daily journal. So I use the daily notes. I try to, I do a thing called morning pages, where I'm trying to write 750 words every morning. Just like try to hit that word count regardless of what comes out, just to keep me writing. And so I do that in my Obsidian daily note. I also do like, I have a weekly newsletter, on my website, that mostly weekly. It's sort of, become kind of every other week.
Yeah.
But for that, I'll do my initial drafts in Obsidian as well, and then I'll publish it as a draft to. I use Ghost for my website and newsletter, so it gets published as a draft there, and then like I'll revise it and kind of like finish and post it in Ghost. For my novels, I currently use an app called Highland 2.
Never heard.
And it's an app developed in part by John August, who is a screenwriter.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, I think its prime use case is like writing, for like, yeah, scripts like that. But it also, I like the way that it works for novels as well. And so I use that also I use that when I'm like working on my novels. But then like, yeah, I feel like every few months, every like year or so, I find that I like try out something else or try to see if there's a certain kind of writing that's like better done in like a certain app.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think for me it's mostly code versus non-code, and pretty much all the non-code stuff lives in Obsidian for me at the moment. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
It's I think I've been using Obsidian for maybe 2 years.
Yeah, there's something about like when it comes to writing fiction, there's something about Obsidian for me that is like too like hyperlinked for me, because like when I'm writing a story, I don't do any, I'm not typically referring to other documents.
Yeah.
Especially when I'm doing like, it's mostly when I'm doing like a first draft. It's sort of, I'm just trying to like, let my subconscious just like pour those words out of the page. And anytime I stop to like link to things and look things up, that's like an interruption. So I think that's probably why I like find Obsidian a little uncomfortable for doing that, because it's like so easy to just like link to something or like check something that
I mean, it doesn't quite feel like, I'm not sure why I think this, but in my mind it feels like if something gets long enough, it doesn't quite belong in Obsidian. Maybe it's something like that as well, like it's its own thing. It shouldn't be hyperlinked that way. So.
Yeah. Even for like journaling and for like, I think writing drafts of blog posts, it feels like a little less than ideal for me.
Yeah.
But it's really great at like knowledge capture and management, and
it's sort of everything goes in there, and then some things also move out of there to other places.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing. I use a text editor. I think it's called COT, C-O-T, for a little bit of coding, but like. Yeah, basically editing my blog posts, because those are just plain Markdown files. So they could have lived in Obsidian as well, but somehow those feel distinct as well. So they go out in COT and they live there. Like show notes documents also live in COT and not in Obsidian for some reason. So it's like a little bit of splitting out for separate projects, I think. Yeah. So, John August, he did some other app around script writing before as well, didn't he?
I'm not sure. Yeah. Maybe back. Yeah, I think maybe like back in the day, like years ago, possibly.
Yeah. I feel like there was something a long time ago associated with. Yeah, I'll look that up and link it as well. So did you have to do a lot of work to force yourself not to include more features in Bebop, or was it very clear where to start and when the first version was done?
Yeah, I think I was worried that my initial prototype wasn't going to be, I was worried people were going to like download it and just be like, that's it. That's all it is. And so I think that was one of the reasons I added that like flashback feature for like that first version. 'Cause I was like, okay, with this, it feels like at least like a little bit, a little bit more than just someone who did like a tutorial and put their app on the App Store. And so, I mentioned earlier, it's like I'm a full-time writer, author. And so this is something that I do in my spare time as work on this app. And I think that's actually like, it's a feature, not a bug. It's something that actually works to my advantage because I'm not adding things as quickly. And so when I do add something, I get to like test it extensively in my everyday life, because sometimes it'll be like a couple of weeks before I can get back in front of the code.
Oh yeah.
And so so that actually results in like me realizing like, oh yeah, this thing I thought would be a interesting feature, it's not even necessary. I'm not really using it. And then on the flip side, there are like, yeah, it's like I'm noticing like, oh, I keep doing the same thing and it's kind of a pain. And so a lot of it is just like coming out of my own experience. Yeah. And so I think like, yeah, I think especially, you know, to all your listeners who are like part-time developers, it's like, try to use that to your advantage, you know, because it's like, I can't outcompete Facebook or Figma on, you know, the pace of development, right? No. I can't outcompete Apple on its own like Notes app.
Yeah.
And so just thinking about like, I think also just like thinking about like the kind of app that I want to actually build and release. I did actually had a couple other app ideas that I like prototyped using, while I was working on Bebop, and those ended up just like not like I used them, you know, kind of on my own, and they just like they didn't work. They didn't do the thing I wanted them to do. Like, I guess like, you know, in terms of like I thought they were solving a problem, but they weren't. The problem was a different problem than I was expecting. So I ended up just like, you know, kind of like, stopped working on those. And that I will say that's like one of the really great things about AI coding tools for me is because I have a bunch of app ideas, and to be able to like, you know, create a prototype of them relatively quickly, that gets me a lot of useful information about whether or not that this app is something that's even like, you know, worthwhile to keep working on. So
in what end or what part of Bebop did you start with? What was like the first thing you built for it?
Yeah, the first thing was just to, you know, have like a blank text editor and to be able to like select an iCloud filter. So then I did that, and so I was kind of learning about, you know, iCloud Drive integration and all that stuff. And then after I had that in place, then I created the share extension. And so then I was like, as soon as I did that, I'm like, oh, now I have to deal with kind of like, you know, ownership, because they're like separate things. And then like I had dealing with like app groups and then especially, and then like I was also simultaneously like working on a settings page, and then, you know, trying to like wrap my head around like user defaults and and there was like so much just like you know, redundant code that like I was like trying to simplify, but, you know, GPT was not that's one area where it wasn't up to date. And so I ended up just having to just like manually read a bunch of like articles and tutorials and figure it out that way. So those were, I think it was like, it was the, you know, being able to like save the file, and then the share extension, and then having a settings page to, you know, to kind of specify all those settings. So that was the combination of things that I worked on primarily for version 1. Yeah.
Once those things work, it's quite a long way in one way toward finished useful app.
Yeah, and I think it benefited from that. Like, it's like it was immediately useful because as soon as I could start saving to, you know, to iCloud Drive, I could start testing it and actually using it with, you know, with my desktop apps. So so there wasn't that much of a time gap between when I started to when it was like immediately useful and like better than what I was using before.
But so how long did that part of the development take roughly?
I think that initial setting, like to the point where I could actually replace, like have a suitable replacement for, you know, that Captio app that I was using before. I think it wasn't more than, you know, like probably like a couple of weeks of, you know, working on it part-time. Yeah. So from there, I sent it to a few friends to kind of like beta test and did like the test flight. And then from there to actually, I think like turn it into an app that I could put on the App Store was like, you know, it was like, I don't know, at least 3-4 months probably.
I mean, it's one of those processes where there are like 50% of the things you don't even know you need to think about beforehand.
Exactly.
And everything takes longer than you expect it to as well.
Yeah. And then there's all the like the business side of it too, right? It's like, okay, I have to create marketing material, like screenshots.
Oh yeah.
I have to, try to understand how to like do my keywords so that I turn up in search results. There's like that whole other side of it that is like, I think like I had like a similar experience. Like, so my very, very first novel before I started writing for children was an adult novel that I published through a Kickstarter funding campaign.
Oh.
I raised a bunch of money to hire an editor to work with, a freelance editor to work with, and then also print 600 hardcover copies. And so that was similar in that, like, the novel and the manuscript, it got to the place where it was done, but then I had to like learn how to like design the interior of the book. I had to do print production and like deal with shipping and all those things. And so, so I think there's, there's a lot of merit to like, even like building small apps. A friend of mine, Robin Sloan, he has this great blog post essay where he says that an app can be a home cooked meal, and that like he has, an app that he's built for just his family members. And so everyone's just on a test flight. It's not in the app store.
Yeah.
And, if he like, it's like if something changes with it that he needs to tell people about, he can just send them a message, like a text message, and let them know like, here's what to look out for. Because once you're creating something that is like going out into the world beyond just you and your friends and a small group of people, then you're sort of like, you're dealing with this, like at least like one or possibly two orders of magnitude greater complexity in kind of all the considerations you have to make. So I think there will definitely be like certain things that having had this experience with AI coding tools, that like certain things that I'll build that are only just like for me because it's something that helps my workflow, but I don't. It's like, it doesn't necessarily need to, be a public thing.
Yeah. So when you started making like updates and adding new features to Bebop, do you use has the AI workflow changed in any way? Or is it about the same?
I think it's about the same.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of like, now I'm getting to the point where there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes, like refactoring, that I'm sort of doing more of that with the AI tools. But otherwise, the workflow is pretty much the same.
So if you want to refactor something, you start by asking the tools, like, how can I make this more, like extract this, or
yeah.
It's fun. It's fun because I'm realizing how my own mind sort of defaults, and I think that I would sort of start to feel like, no, I can't let the robots change this more. I need to I start fiddling by myself instead of keep using the tools.
Right. Yeah. And I do think like after having more experience with it and just more experience with Swift UI and Swift, it's like I'm better able to like kind of verify that, like, oh yeah, this answer that it just gave me is not going to work. Yeah, I think like it's easy with the AI coding tools to ask it to do something and then have it just generate some code that works, but you don't necessarily know how it works.
Yeah.
And I think that's really great if you're in kind of the prototype stage, because you don't need to understand how it works. You just I feel like you just need to get it working well enough to be able to test it and figure out if that's what you actually need in your app.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of go back and understand like, okay, this is what this is doing. This is how I may be able to like improve it. So yeah, so I do think it takes a level of like experience and also, if I didn't have my like front end and my background working with like blog website templates and doing like HTML, CSS, I wouldn't have the level of like being able to verify whether or not the code was like, was actually doing what it needed to. And so I do think it like the best kind of like position for these tools is kind of if you already do have some experience and enough experience to be able to say like, okay, this is what I want.
Yeah. I have some idea what I'm after.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I use Copilot a bit, but I probably should try doing more of the kind of stuff you're doing, like asking it to do more instead of just, I'm really using it at work as a fancy and sometimes slightly annoying autocomplete
Mm-hmm.
and then
Mm-hmm.
not really doing the question and answering.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. 'Cause if I try to think about like my experience with like writing, it's like I turn off autocomplete for especially like AI assisted like in emails and text. It's like because I'm like, all it does is it makes my writing more cliche. That's what it does. But then it's like with like code, there are certain like patterns and things that you repeat that you actually like, you can't not be cliche because if you don't use the conventions, then like your code will break.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess like that's maybe the difference for me is that like
that's a point to being cliche.
I hate it when it comes to writing, but I'm okay with it with code.
Yeah. Code is a mean to an end in a different way as well. I want to get this working, and I want it to be sort of understandable and maintainable to some degree in the future. So it helps if it's sort of cliched, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes. So I guess when you're working like this, you have the whole project open in VS Code as well to give the context.
Yeah. I have it open in VS Code, and I just like I'll basically like save in VS Code and then switch over to Xcode and Command R and yeah like
it's the big compile and run tool.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Is there a better way of doing it? You can't do it straight from VS Code, right? You still need Xcode to actually like.
Someone can probably do it. And I think there's some more stuff coming for that. Apple has the yearly developer conference.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And one of the things, I haven't watched nearly everything, but I watched the main presentations. And one of the things they said was that they had been working on a bunch of VS Code plugins for like Swift and Swift UI as well, I think. Swift definitely. But yeah, so I feel like that might evolve.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure it would definitely be technically possible for someone to build a VS Code plugin that actually ran your code as well.
Yeah.
Or compiled it and started the simulator or something. But I don't know if someone has actually done it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's also this whole other world of like, sort of like, tests and debugging and that part, those pieces of Xcode that I have not. I have not written any tests because it's just me, it's just me manually testing.
Yeah, exactly. I'm very much the same as well. I'm happy when I manage to find good places and cases to write tests, and I'm happy when I write some, but very much manual as well. And I think it depends on what you do as well.
Mm-hmm.
People who do big algorithmic backend stuff, some of that is fantastic for testing as well.
Yeah, true.
But clicking around in a UI or a web page, it doesn't feel like it's as natural. But the debugger can be really great in Xcode. Actually, I have to say that.
Okay. I need to spend a lot more time with that.
It's similar to other debugging tools, but once you have a problem and can step through it, it can be really really useful to strange crashes and stuff. So it's worth looking into on a rainy day sometime.
Yeah. So that reminds me, like, so there's this like one issue that I have not been able to get an answer from any of the GPT tools. I've not been able to find a solution online. But so what happens is I'm using app storage to hold a data array of the recent notes for the flashback feature.
Oh yeah.
And I'm using, like, from what I can see, I'm like, using the same instance of those settings in my like share extension and my main app. But like sometimes, and it doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes when I share a link or something from the share extension and then go back to my main app, I'll hit that flashback button and it won't recognize it won't recognize the link that was just put in, even though the file's actually there. And I've set up like, notifications and things like that, and like tried all these different things, and like it just like it doesn't work. And so that was one of those things that like I've lost like so many hours just on trying to get that right. And
I've had I don't know the answer to this particular one, unfortunately, but I've had like similar types of problems quite a few times. And I mean, the most common one I've had is when you have things that are supposed to like UI automatically updating when something changes.
Yeah.
And having something in an array. And I changed one element in the array, but the array itself didn't change. So the UI doesn't change. Stuff like that. I tend to trip over. But sometimes I feel like there should be a name for a common problem, for problems like this. I could search for them.
Exactly.
But
maybe some of your listeners will.
Someone's screaming into the air right now. Yeah. I know this. And if you do, please get in touch. Yeah, stuff like that is interesting. But I guess the share extension is like a separate process or something, so it could be something with passing data between processes.
Yeah.
Because I suppose when you're... No, I don't know how this works. I shouldn't speculate. Like debugging on speculation, it's not always the best thing. Yeah, so do you have you don't have to say what's on it, but do you have a long list of like stuff you would try adding to Bebop if you had infinite time?
Yeah, definitely like more ways of getting, more ways of kind of like capturing your fleeting ideas. Yeah, because that's kind of like the ethos of, and so it's like any way that I can help you capture that idea in different contexts.
That makes sense.
I know that like some people have asked for just like, better like widgets and app shortcuts, and because like right now you can create a shortcut on your own, just to, like open the app and it will automatically pop you into that new note. And so so you can do that, and then set that for your like iPhone Pro action button. But to just like have that be a little more formalized, I think. And then something I'm really, really interested in is, and I don't know how it's going to actually work out, so I'm waiting until like September to see, but basically the way that the AI features that are built into the new iOS, how well will that work? And can I just can you just say, hey, capture this note and have it automatically know that you want to put it in Bebop? So that's something that I'll be kind of like looking at. But before that, I was like, I wonder if there's a better way of handling like transcription than tapping that that icon in the corner of the keyboard. So then there's things like that, and then I think like other things that get into this territory of like, I don't know if I want to do this, because then it's getting into the realm of like organization. And away from the capture, right? Because and I do this, and I've heard feedback from some folks that it's like they have a handful of notes that they repeatedly update again and again. So like I personally typically have one that just says like today, and it has a kind of like task list for the day. And interestingly enough, I realized like when I built the append feature, that I could just like I could just put today as the title and have that be and have it just like append to that. So that was like a kind of like something that was like, oh yeah, this actually works. But it's like it's also like not optimal. I think it only works if like you have sort of these like short names for your for your notes that you repeatedly update. So I'm thinking like is there an elegant way to actually be able to quickly pull up a note that you have in your archive or vault that wouldn't take you too far away from that capture mentality. So that's something I'm looking into.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it fits in as well, but maybe but yeah, it's true. Like you say, it has to be really nice and simple and not distracting, not another decision to make.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing is, because I'm in America, I'm in a car very often. And so like, the kind of current options for capturing notes to Bebop in the car are not, they're less than ideal. So, so maybe there's a solution that can like also address that. And maybe that is like the new kind of AI features in the next.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely could be if they live up to what they've started talking about. Yeah.
I feel like I've just like over the past years, I've just grown increasingly like suspicious of demos. Just like after seeing what's happened with that, the humane pin. And even like the rabbit OS thing. It's just, it's like, okay, it's like,
sure.
I understand that these are, the ideal conditions that it'll work, but like, what about all the other, all the other use cases, all the other contexts?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
but it feels like it should be pretty promising for a use case like Bebop, like capturing, if it can reliably feed you transcribed text.
Yeah.
Then we've come pretty far.
Yeah. Hopefully. So we'll see.
Yeah. Fingers crossed for Apple to catch up to Bebop. Oh, time flies. Is there anything else we should cover before we wrap up?
No, I had a lovely conversation.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you wanted to ask?
It's probably another episode. I mean, I'm curious about your. Yeah. But maybe you have other podcast episodes I can listen to about how you do your writing in general.
Yeah. So I mentioned the podcast. See You on the Bookshelf was the one that detailed the making of my first children's novel. My other one is called Booksmitten, Booksmitten. And that's the one that I like co-host with some friends. And for that one, our latest season, which we just wrapped up, we're all trying to write like a picture book. So like for like really young children, 32 pages. And there we have significantly less experience in that than writing novels. So that was kind of you can maybe like listen to that and get a taste for like my writing process. But
sounds great.
But maybe in the future, if there's like a major version of Bebop that gets that gets done, I can come back and we can talk more about that stuff.
Would be great. And people can find you. Where should people go if they want to find out more?
Yeah, people can just find me at Jack Cheng, JackCheng.com. I'm also on Instagram and Threads at the same, at Jack Cheng. I also do, and you first contacted me through Mastodon, and so I'm at Jack Cheng at indieweb.social there. And on my website, you can actually find a link to my newsletter, which I call it the Sunday letter.
Yeah, it's really nice. And
thank you. Yeah. So I've been writing that newsletter for since 2012. So as long as you've been doing this podcast. And it started as a series of like, I would write weekly updates for that Kickstarter project that I did for my very first book. Yeah. And I enjoyed that like opportunity to reflect on my, writing process so much that I just like kept doing it even after the project. So, so that's something that, I'm doing. My newsletters will probably become a little less frequent and timely because my partner and I are expecting a child in the next month.
Any day now.
Any day now. Yeah, it could literally be like later today.
Exactly.
So that's something that like, that is definitely like on the horizon, and will just mean that I just have to be more, kind of like careful with my time and features and development on Bebop too. So
yeah. Oh, it's going to be great.
Not a bad thing.
No, not at all. Best possible. So thank you so much, Jack, for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Tack för att just du lyssnar på Kodsnack. Om du vill stödja oss, varför inte tipsa en bekant om podden? Eller lämna en recension i till exempel iTunes eller något annat ställe där det går att sätta betyg på poddar. Du kan också stödja oss genom att köpa oss en kopp kaffe på Coffee. ko-fi.com/kodsnack. Alla pengar går direkt till att göra podden bättre och trevligare. Du kan också komma och hänga i vår Slack-kanal. Länk finns på kodsnack.se, precis som alla andra länkar och all annan info kopplat till varje avsnitt. Sist men inte minst finns det också en länk till vår Spreadshop-butik där du kan köpa tröjor och andra prylar med Kodsnacktryck. Återigen, tusen tack för att du lyssnar. Vi hörs.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.